Welcome to the Smiling at the Future podcast. My name is Christy Rose, and this is my pursuit to glean practical wisdom on femininity, homemaking, finances, relationships, and singleness from the God-fearing men and women in my life. Hope you enjoy this journey with me as we learn to smile at the future. Hey everyone, today I'm sharing a conversation I had with author and speaker Lydia Brownback. And as a woman in her 60s who has lived her entire life as a single woman, she has a unique vantage point and shares so many nuggets of wisdom that really moved me, and I hope will strike a chord with you also. If you enjoy this conversation, then I would highly recommend that you go and buy Lydia's book called Fine China is for Single Women Too. It's been around for a while, so you may already have a copy, but if not, you can find it most places that books are sold. And that book served as the jumping off point for the questions that I asked her in this episode. We will also be giving a copy away on our Instagram page, so make sure you enter that giveaway if you want a free one. And I'm also going to link another book that Lydia wrote on loneliness in the show notes of this episode, if you just need a little more spiritual support in that area. And now here is my conversation with Lydia Brownback. Welcome, Lydia. I have so appreciated your writing, which makes me very grateful to have you on the podcast and share you with the listeners. For those who are hearing your name for the first time today, would you give us some background on who you are and what caused you to write this book on singleness?
Oh, Christy, it's great to be with you today. I am a writer, Bible teacher, and a publisher. So I'm always working with God's word in one capacity or another with the majority of my waking hours. And it's a great delight to be able to do that. And why I wrote this book, I wrote it a long time ago now, almost 20 years ago. And I think that came into my mind during a season when I had to attend numerous weddings over the course of 1 year. And it was that stage of life, early 30s, late 20s, where you start to feel like you've been left behind because all your friends are getting married and you're not following them into that stage of life. And I was in the weddings, attending the weddings. So of course, with that, all the bridal showers that go along with it. And I remember thinking that at the time, all these women were back in the day when brides still registered for fine china patterns and all the formal tableware that is not so much in style now, but at the time it still was. And I remember thinking, why is it that only brides and married women can have those nice things? Why did they seem to be reserved as sacred marital territory? If we single women like to host nice dinner parties, if we like nice china, why do we have to wait for marriage to get it? And we sort of built these social constructs around certain things that maybe aren't necessary to do. So I went out that year and chose a china pattern I liked and registered for it. And over the next few years, my family gave me a place setting every Christmas, every birthday, and to where I ended up with settings for 12. And I could host a nice dinner party. And we can break out of those norms. And so I guess the whole point was saying, if marriage isn't coming along right now, we don't have to put life on hold. We don't have to put the things we love on hold. What are we free to do biblically? Well, if we're free to do it biblically, we're free to do it. And so if you enjoy something, then do it. And I just sort of felt a need to encourage other singles with this discovery that I was realizing myself. And that's how the book came into being.
Well, you touched on so many themes in that book that I've felt, thought, experienced. I mean, I was highlighting so much of the book. So many of the stories that you share are very relatable of other friends that you've kind of seen how they've handled different situations and aspects of singleness. Just to teach us there's a better way. There's a better way to think about this, to live the single life. And a lot of the things that can cause us to fall in the ditches are fear or trying to control our life or not submitting to God's sovereignty. So those are a lot of the themes that came up in the book. But one question that single ladies get asked often, maybe they even ask themselves this question, is why are you still single? Why am I still single? And you address that question in the book. So I'm curious, can you help us understand why it's important that we move on from that specific preoccupation?
Yeah, it's not really a fruitful question because we can't really get any answer for that. I mean, let me qualify that by saying if we are living in a certain way, if we are sitting on our couch and never doing anything to be part of this world, to be part of our church, to engage in the to be good stewards of our gifts and our talents, and if we're just sitting home and not serving in any way, well, then maybe we do need to say, there's a reason here. So we examine our lives. I'm not saying we don't do that, but the constant why question that we can't answer. If we're living our lives and then we still ask why all the time, think about how we just can't get an answer to that. So it's not, I can say our minds start to go thinking about, well, maybe if I change my appearance, maybe it's because the reason is my appearance. Well, that's not it. You look around at the wives and there's a range. There's beautiful and there's not so beautiful. And it is, if you look around in your church or anywhere in society, you will see that beauty is not what gets somebody married. And so that isn't it. And then you think, well, maybe I'm not trying hard enough. That's the worst one. I think the one that plagues women the most is maybe I'm not trying hard enough. And what they don't realize underneath that is they can be free from that because God is the one who determines who gets married and who doesn't. And so we don't have to help God get us married. If he determines and when he determines that is the state of life he wants us in, he will make it happen. So it's up to him. So to ask why is that's primarily why it's fruitless. There's also, even practically speaking, there's a lot of reasons that go into it, and we will never know all of them. I mean, we people ask me, why are you single? And I'll say to them, well, okay, opportunity. I've had some opportunity, but it was not the right opportunity. I have had, do I have father issues? Well, yes, I'm sure I do. The providence of God, yes, all of the above. So, we just can never pinpoint exactly any one thing. And the very circumstances that have worked to keep me single could be the same ones God uses in someone else's life for them to say, this is why I'm married. So we really cannot know why we are single. All we can do is entrust it to the Lord. We have to let go of that why question unless we are living in such a way that we are hindering ourselves from where marriage can naturally happen with God's oversight.
The last episode I did with Philip DeCourcy, he made a statement that was really helpful. He said, moving cars are more easily steered. So if you're walking in God's will, if you're living for him, he can steer you and change the boundary lines, expand the boundary lines of your life, but live fully and fruitfully within those boundary lines. And you bring up that theme in the book, which was just helpful as well, knowing that at any time God will decide when those change, but we don't change them. And the only way that you could change them, and this is a quote from your book, is if you're stepping off the path of obedience. So, you could manipulate, you could sinfully chase after marriage and change your marital status, but you don't know if God's giving that to you if you're using sinful means to acquire that. And you want full confidence and peace that this is God's will. This is his plan for you. You're not just making it happen.
Yeah. I would say that if sin is a part of us landing in a relationship, we should really be suspicious that in terms of God's will, we should never trust anything that comes into our lives that we've obtained by sin. And in fact, we should get away from whatever that is. And so, but yes, we can use all biblical means possible to change our circumstances. But even within that, we don't want to just say black and white. We want to say good, better, and best. And so there are a lot of gray areas that where this is where biblical wisdom, the book of Proverbs, and all kinds of biblical wisdom, it's I think as we marinate in scripture, all of it, we start to develop a flavor for God's will, and we learn how to apply the black and white of the word to our gray situations in life. So that's where it's not just right or wrong, it's good, better, and best. And so I know in my own case, there were some situations where I could have gone forward into marriage and it wasn't a wrong issue. These were godly men. But in my situations, it was a matter of good, better, and best. And how can I best pour out my life for the Lord? And in the opportunities presented to me, it was not through marrying any one of them. So that's where I think the boundaries can move, but let's be careful to do it wisely.
And I like that point that you're bringing out, the good, better, and best, because so many choices for godly people, that's what it comes down to. It's not between sin and holiness, but it's typically between what serves the Lord best and with my skills and talents. The next question here, this really struck a chord with me. I know so many women who are, especially as they're getting later in their singleness, this is just a common experience that your social stability changes as friends get married and move into different seasons, and the search for new friends can often be wearisome and discouraging. So, how would you encourage the ladies listening to respond emotionally and spiritually to these changes?
Those are very real pains. And I think it's so difficult when at that particular stage of life where most people are settling down and you are not one of them. I'd say loneliness is a big factor at that time. And God's remedy for that, if we find it in Psalm 68:8, where he says that it mentions God's delight in setting the solitary in a home, or in families. And it is just because we are alone, we don't have to be, we're alone the way we are maybe defining it and the way our friends are getting away from it. They're getting married, but God intends for us not to be alone, whether we're married or single. So, as I said, I wrote a book on loneliness. And as I say in there, the loneliest women I know are not single. They're women in a difficult marriage. And I think that if you are single and alone, and very likely in that stage of loneliness, because one by one your friends are disappearing, they get married and then they're entering into their marriage in this whole new stage of life, and that's occupying their attention. They don't have as much time in that transition to give to their friends, and even when they do, it's not the same as it was, because you don't have that commonality of shared singleness anymore, and you have different interests now. And if you're one of the few who is not getting married, who do you have? It can feel so lonely. And I think God's provision for that in Psalm 68:8, for us, our application is the church. We are not meant to do the Christian life alone, whether we're married or single. And for singles, we find companionship and family in the body of Christ. So I would say that right there is worth, if you don't have that, if a single doesn't have that, it's worth changing her life to get a church where you can go and be a vital part of it. And this isn't about just going in there because you're single or identifying yourself as a single. It's going in there and being who you are, identifying yourself as Christy or Lydia or whoever you are, and going into the church and finding out where you can plug in, and then radiating love and joy and being a part of things. And you'll find in the process that you're embraced in return. And so that is the remedy. And, quite honestly, I think in years of observation have shown me that is the best place typically to meet someone anyway that you might want to marry. And it's in the fellowship of God's people in the church. And so that is what I say to people who are missing their friends. Go get involved as much as you can in a sound church, because you're going to find companionship there. And so some of the problem isn't that we don't have a church. It's we have to ask ourselves, are we willing for God's provision for us to be something other than marriage right now? And people will say, well, I don't know where to get this. I don't know. And what they're really saying is, I don't like that option. I want it to be this option. And this is where you can get stuck in your loneliness because you want it to look a certain way. And so it's not that you can't find remedies, it's just prayerfully asking the Lord, going before Him, opening your heart to how He might want to fill that at this time in your life.
That was a point that I underlined in your book about how some people there's only one way to happiness in their mind, and they're closed to whatever other means God could use to bring joy and fulfillment to them. So I think that again comes down to submission. Lord, what do you have? I'm going to be open to how you want to bless me in this time. I also appreciate how you're bringing out that some of the loneliest women can be women in a hard marriage. And kind of there's a chapter in your book that you talk about the reality of the challenges of married life too. And I think there's a balance. We're not, naysaying marriage, of course, but it's just the reality that every season has joys and sorrows. And so if we have a realistic perspective, then it's not going to be marriage isn't going to be the thing that's heaven or that's going to save us, or we just enjoy each season. We understand the challenges of each. And so that can be helpful for women who are desperate to get married and think that it will solve all of their problems and meet all their needs in life. So,
yes, exactly. And I think if we think that marriage is going to bring us the happiness, it's going to solve our problems in life, it's going to become our life, then we've made it into an idol. We've made it something it was never meant to be. And that is to also adopt an unrealistic view of life in general. And as you just said, marriage doesn't solve our problems. It just gives us different ones. It's trading in one set for another. And I know most single women will say, well, give me that set any day. And, that's always, as I say in my book, the grass is always greener. And yes, marriage is a wonderful state. God created marriage, and it is His normal ordering for people. And so we want to be quick to say that. We don't want to denigrate marriage in any way. That is God's normal ordering. But what if it's not for everyone? And so we don't know what God's will is for each individual life. People ask me now, I'm 62 years old, and people say, how do you know you were called to be single? And I say, if I get to the end of my life and I never get married, I'll know I was called to be single. So I think we many times we just sort of want an up or down answer from God. Well, just let me know what your will is so I can get on with it either way. Either I'm going to stay here just doing everything I can to see my singleness as a problem to solve, or if it's never going to happen, let me get on with it. But I think God doesn't work that way. I think it's get on with today and let Him take care of tomorrow, because we don't know when our marital status might change. The key is live today where God has you today. And so pursuing the friendships and all the things that are available for you today.
and I know you're friends with Nancy DeMoss Wolgemuth, and her story is unique in that she had a singles ministry for most of her life, and then the Lord changed that. I think she was in her 50s, right, when she got married?
Yes. Yeah, she and I haven't communicated in a number of years directly, but when we were both single, our paths crossed frequently. We did some work together from time to time. And, that's exactly here. Like she got this, she lived a fruitful single life. And in God's perfect way and time, He brought a husband to her. And they've been, and she's experienced the joys and the sorrows of marriage like she had before with singleness. I mean, she was married for not very long at all when her husband got quite ill. And so their first few years of their marriage were really occupied with that. And so there's just there's a trade-off there. And you may the difficulties of being single are true. But when you get married, if you don't think that getting married is going to suddenly have all your problems go away, it just isn't. You're just going to have different problems. But I do actually want to add a little illustration to what we were just saying. So a single friend, had a flat tire one day, and she was very upset. And I remember she said, if I had a husband, he'd be here right now changing that tire. And I said, no, let me tell you how that would go. You'd call him and he'd be at work and he'd tell you to call AAA. And that's the reality. And so we can't think that if we have a husband that he's going to fix everything in our life and make it easy. We were talking about the realities of marriage. Day-to-day life is a challenge, whether you're married or single. And the Apostle Paul is the one who said that he saw singleness as a blessing because it's the way to an undistracted, devoted life toward the Lord. When we are married, we are preoccupied with worldly things. I don't mean sinfully worldly things. I just mean with the matters of this life, like changing tires and paying taxes and just relational dynamics and everything that goes into relationships. And that once we are married, that becomes God's will for our focus. And we have to then also keep him in that as our primary. Can you imagine? I think that's really hard. If you're married and you're called to serve your husband and your family while also prioritizing the Lord, that is an ongoing hour by hour challenge for any married person. While we're single, we don't have that division. We don't have that tug on us. And so as long as we are single, let's appreciate the privilege we have of doing that, because that's where everyone's going to end up. Everyone is going to end up single. So once we get to heaven, there's no marriage in heaven. So we right now as singles have an opportunity to kind of showcase what heaven is going to be like. And in terms of our joy in the Lord and our devotion and that undistracted focus on him.
Yes. And I've been meditating on that so much, and how I can sometimes be a very distracted single, filling my mind or my time with things that are frivolous or are not drawing me close to the Lord. And whether we eat or drink or whatever we do, we can give glory to Christ, but then there are things that just pull us down and that are of no spiritual value. So I've been just thinking about, what are those things in my life that the weights, the hindrances that I can cut so I can have more of a pure devotion to Christ and use this time to the full that he's given me. It's a gift and I don't want to squander it, and I want to be a good steward of it. So that's just something I've been meditating on. But what would you tell the woman who is fearful that she's missed an opportunity for meeting her husband, or thinks she already passed him up? Maybe she dated a guy, didn't, pan forward, and now she's looking back saying, "Oh, I should have buried him." What encouragement would you offer the woman who's in that place?
I would have to say there's no plan B with God. So if you made that choice to not go forward, even if you made a mistake, God, his sovereign overruling is evident in every life. And, I get this, we see this so clearly in the prophet Jonah, and how God called him to go to a certain place to do a certain thing with certain people. And Jonah didn't like God's call, so he ran away from that. And things didn't go well for him when he ran away. So through the process of God's discipline in his life, he ended up getting the call a second time. And what did he do then? He got where God had called him to go initially. And so God called him to go to Nineveh. He ended up in Nineveh, even though he'd chosen to run away. So that was a very specific call on his life for a specific reason. And I think it's sort of in our own lives, we can consider the principles there and say that God is going to have his way with us. The only difference is whether the way there is going to be easy or hard. And so if Jonah just obeyed God in the first place, he would have saved himself some very unpleasant ordeals. But even in the unpleasant ordeal, that was the very thing God used to change his heart, to draw him closer. And then he still got him where he was. So I would just say, for anyone who's fearful of that right now, read the story of Jonah and see the compassion of God, the mercy of God. And he takes up all of our mistakes and follies and into his plan for us. Nothing catches him off guard. Nothing surprises him. Nothing we've done in the past, nothing we're doing in the present, nothing we're going to do in the future. He's already worked in and through and around that, bring about to guide and steer our lives. So it's not up to us to be sure we do everything right in order to get married. Do we trust God's sovereign power? Reading Jonah, you see God, he appointed a storm, he appointed a fish, he appointed a worm, he appointed a plant. he moves even nature to steer people where he wants them to be. So do we think that he's any less powerful and attentive to our lives?
You talk about that in their book of we just don't understand God's sovereignty if we have those fears. We truly don't understand it. So better preoccupation, better thought would be meditating on the sovereignty of God and his absolute control. And in the last episode, once again, that I did with Philip DeCourcy, he brought out many of those same points that God can course correct, redirect. If we make a decision and in the moment we're making the best decision we know to make, and maybe we're second guessing it, God can override it. It's his prerogative, but we're trusting him to be the shepherd of our lives, to guide us.
Yes, think about the proverb that says, "Man makes his plans, but God directs his steps."
So powerful. That's going to be something we need to keep meditating on often. But this next question, and this is something that was very relatable. I know so many women in a similar spot, but the woman who is forcing herself to be attracted to someone or simply grasping at any available man for fear that she may end up single if she doesn't, or that somehow she's in sin if she can't make herself be attracted to someone. What would you encourage the woman who is in that place, in that mindset?
Yeah, I would say that is a decision is making too much of marriage. I think the idolatry of marriage can come out in this. God is again, he's so kind, and he has hardwired us in such a way that we are meant to be attracted to the opposite gender. And if you are forcing yourself to be with someone where you are not at all attracted, and I'm not talking about, we want to define our terms. If you're thinking that you have to have that sort of Hollywood hot, panting, burning passion all the time, that's a bit of a Hollywood thing. That's not necessarily godly, but there needs to be an attraction. There has to be, and I think for a woman, the thing that fuels attraction is respect. If you can respect this man, respect him, his godliness, his leadership, his how he lives his life, you're going to find yourself attracted. The more you respect him in different areas of life, the more potential for attraction. So ask yourself, do you respect this man? And if not, you shouldn't be dating him. And because then you're setting yourself up for an unbiblical marriage that way. But if it's the Hollywood kind of passion you're looking for and thinking you have to have, that's also not necessary. That's a fictitious thing as well. It's worldly. So there's sort of it's evaluating what you mean by attractiveness. And if you have this, if a guy doesn't match the things you have on a list, I want him to have blue eyes and make a certain amount of money and all these things, and you're not attracted because he doesn't match the things on your list, throw that list away. And Ephesians 5 talks about marriage there in verses 22 to 33, and it talks about how a husband is meant to be toward his wife, leading and holy and loving, and how right there we see that a wife is to respect her husband. And this is how God designed marriage, and it's meant to picture Christ over his bride, the church. So those are the qualities that we should be attracted to in a man. And I know personally, for years, I knew that in my head, and I saw that, but then went through a season where I wasn't attracted to men like that. That can be another caveat. We can be attracted to men who aren't good for us. And so not just out of desperation, but just because we're sinners and we can be drawn to bad things. And so I remember saying, Lord, I know I should pray for and want what I see in Ephesians 5, but my choices are showing me that my heart is drawn to other things. So please change my heart to actually desire and want these qualities. Make this the list in my heart, and let me be attracted to men like this. And I needed the Spirit to make that change in me, to make that possible. And he answered that prayer. I started having a very different taste in men at that point. So that's part of it too. So in terms of desperation, in terms of panic is not going to lead to a good choice. Never think, uh-oh, last chance, have to do it. Because until you die, you have chances.
Yeah, no, good point. And you bring out a story in that section of a couple, Tara and Tom, who had dated off and on for like 5 years. And the thought process of Tara, who she couldn't respect Tom, but she seemed to think that if I could just change myself, be different, or if he would change a little bit, somehow we can make this work. And they went on that quest for probably much longer than was prudent for both of them. But ultimately, her decision came down to the scripture of like, I don't know if I can respect him and his decisions. And so this is what God is calling me to do. And if I'm having trouble, even in our dating, respecting him, then, that was a good gauge for her to make that decision by. I really appreciate how you said sometimes we're attracted to the men that aren't good for us. And, we've heard the bad boy attraction, and maybe godliness seems boring or not as flashy or exciting. But I think, and I know for women, because we're so relationally wired, I think it is important that we enjoy spending time with and talking with whoever we marry. I know for me, that's been a huge sticking point of like, well, just can't seem to enjoy a conversation. We're trying, we've given it a decent amount of time to see if we could grow that. So I think that can be a healthy gauge. But I like the foundation that you're setting of the godliness, and attraction can grow from that. If they have the character, if you can respect the man of God that they are, then give the necessary time to see if the feelings can develop from more communication. But if it's just, we believe that God joins two people together. And if you're just not getting a sense that I enjoy this person, I want to spend time with them, I want to join them in their ministry and their life and be a helper to them, those are all questions you can ask yourself. And it's okay. You don't have to have a major reason other than I just don't think we're right for each other. So
Well, and I think in some cultures women don't have the freedom. They're matched up, they have to get married. But we in the West have the freedom. And given that we do, freedom to choose our spouse, then I do think what you're saying is so true. If you are not comfortable, if you feel like you have to make yourself into a chameleon in order to fit with him, if you have to diminish yourself to make the relationship work, there's something wrong with that. And it's not a healthy dynamic. And if you find yourself drawn to the wrong kind of person, it really takes that humility to go before the Lord and say, I'm attracted to men who it's not profitable or fruitful to be drawn to. And I can't help it. I'm just drawn to them. I need you to change my heart. And prayerfully seek that. And as you're in the word and you're praying through, reading passages like Ephesians 5, and asking the Lord to give you a desire for men who emulate that. Sometimes, we can know it in our head, but we want our hearts to actually feel that and be attracted to that. And so you're saying you mentioned the bad boy and how women can be drawn to the bad boy. That's so true. And I think it's not just this, wow, that's kind of exciting. It's not like that. I think there's a lot of dynamics for women, whatever the cause, whatever was in their background, can sometimes choose men who aren't good, or when I say choose, I mean be attracted to men who aren't good for them, because at some level they feel their choice is trying to fix a different problem. They're trying to solve a problem besides just getting married, where they have been hurt in the past, or something has gone. Maybe they had a broken relationship with their father. Maybe, who knows what the issue might be. But if they feel like no man could love them, or if they feel like they're afraid of rejection, the tendency can be in our hearts for us to choose somebody to align ourselves with, because at some level we think if he's this, he'll never leave me because he's bad, and so he'd be lucky to have me. And it's a very sort of unconscious choice we make. But if we are constantly attracted to men who are not godly, that's a good thing to examine. What are we trying to solve another problem in our lives? So this is just part of the good, better, and best, and the wisdom that comes into play, and really asking the Lord to expose, cleanse, and transform our hearts in this area. Sometimes we're single, I think, in the Lord's wisdom, because he is working things out. When I think about the men I was drawn to 20 and 30 years ago, I wouldn't look twice at them today. And I'm so thankful I didn't marry any of them. And so God is constantly at work to grow us and change us. And so now I see, if God does bring a man into my life, I would choose and be drawn today to someone very different from what I would have in the past. And because I didn't marry any of them, I've been able to have a beautiful, fruitful adulthood that wasn't tangled up in a messy marriage. So yeah, he's always at work. And so if you're single today, the Lord is at work. There's a reason. And it's not that you didn't try hard enough, that you did something wrong or made a mistake. It's that the Christian life is always forward. It's oriented forward. And everything God does in our life is preparatory for something he's going to do tomorrow. And so he is at work in your singleness for that purpose.
Yeah, powerful words. That's the title of this podcast, is Smiling at the Future. And we're confident that God has good in store for us, and that good is spiritual good ultimately. But another thing you bring out in your book is just how discontentment can fuel maybe a desperate or wrong choice in men. If you're discontent, you're going to just jump at anything that might offer a way out of your singleness. So be working on that heart attitude now in singleness, because you want to be confident that God is bringing you this husband, that it's not just a desperate choice just to change your circumstances, but you want to know it is God's good gift to you at the right time. The title of your book, Fine China, is for single women too. And we've touched on this a little bit already at the beginning, but some women refrain from activities, purchases, pursuits because they're afraid that going ahead with those things will entrench them in a life of singleness, or they're waiting for the bridal shower. It's funny. Like, I mean, I've seen this mindset in myself through silly things. Like, I'm not going to buy that cute pair of pajamas. I'm going to buy cute pajamas once I get married. I had never been to Disneyland. And so I thought, well, I'm going to save that for a date, a date with a man. And then someone gave me Disneyland tickets as a gift. And I thought, well, guess I'm going to Disneyland as a single. So I'm sure there's so many little things like that we're just kind of holding out on, wanting to wait till that next season to enjoy. But I would love to hear more of your thoughts just on that point of how women can break out of that mindset and just enjoy life.
I love your examples there. It's so true, isn't it? Whether it's buying furniture, buying a house, I think there's other aspects too. I know, and I think it's encouraged in some churches even, where they will say women are advised not to get any sort of education because, well, they're just going to get married, and what good would it do them? And I really don't agree with that. I think that, God has gifted you with a brain, with gifts to serve. And I think, as whether we're single or married, it is loving to the Lord. It is honoring to the Lord to develop and cultivate and use those gifts to the best of our ability, whatever our season of life is. The Apostle Paul said, he who has gifts, let him use them. So, that is a call for all Christians. We are to use our gifts, and particularly there in context, it's spiritual gifts. But I think it applies to all of the talents and things that God has given us in our individuality, that it is pleasing to him and honoring for us to make the best use we can. And so whether it's pursuing an education, and you think about, again, we do it wisely. We say, with what do we expect? We're going to just what to do with it, how to fund it, how to afford it, but never with the mindset, well, I better put it on hold because tomorrow, someday, I might meet a guy, and then it's not going to matter. We're called to make plans with what we have today. And it doesn't mean we crush our hopes for marriage. And that's part of it too. It's almost like, I think, if we go ahead and pursue some of those things, it feels like putting a nail in the coffin of our desire for marriage. But it really isn't. And if we stand back from that and say, why would going to Disneyland or getting a college education or whatever it might be, why would that hinder marriage? It's all in our head. It doesn't hinder marriage. it is maximizing our opportunities with the life God's given us today. Because when he wants us to get married, those things, why would they hinder? It's just ask yourself, what about this would hinder marriage?
That's a good point. Yeah. And life is a vapor. And so we enjoy the gifts God has provided and trust him with the rest. But Lydia, thank you so much for sharing your vantage point on singleness and just what God has taught you as you've submitted to his will and you have proved that his will is good and pleasurable and you've been fruitful, and it's encouraging to see. I know the listeners will be edified and encouraged as well to just keep trusting the Lord with this area of their life, keep obeying him and allowing him to change the boundary lines if and when he wills, but living fully within the boundary lines of singleness right now and enjoying that gift from him. So I just hope that God will continue to bless you in your ministry. And I'm so excited to share this conversation with the listeners.
Thanks, Christy. It's really delightful to talk with you about this.